Hey, I want to welcome everybody to Burrell Communications virtual town hall. Black lives have always mattered to us. I'm Ryan Smith. Thank you so much for having joined us today. You know, this is a discussion that we wanted to have because quite simply, we're living in unique times. In addition to the pandemic that's raging around the world, the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery have brought to the forefront the overt and systemic racism that exists against Blacks in America and the demands for change. So we've seen companies all over the world grappling with how to speak on issues of racial injustice and how to act in a way that matters to Black lives. But during this time, folks at Burrell started asking, have we heard from a Black-owned company about what to say? How do we approach this moment in history with empathy and with action to change an industry, meaning advertising, and society at large in a way that really matters? And that's where I think Burrell Communications is uniquely situated. No one has done what co-CEOs Faye Ferguson and Miguel Williams-Ossie have in making this Black-owned and women-owned advertising agency into an award-winning transcultural marketing solutions company that communicates effectively, not just with all audiences, but with a special unmatched focus to the Black community. And that's the kind of thing that's attracted Fortune 100 companies like Toyota and McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, Walmart, and Google. So today, we all want to encourage you to listen, to learn, to ask questions. And if you've got those questions, I want you to submit them through the Q&A box. And we're going to address as many as we can in the Q&A. But first, let's pay homage to the hard work and dedication of Faye Ferguson and McGee Williams-Ossie as they lead Burrell into the 50th anniversary of this company in 2021. So now I want to start by introducing Faye Ferguson, the co-CEO of Burrell Communications. Faye?
Thanks, Ryan. Great partnering with you again. And so glad that you're moderating this important conversation today. And a virtual welcome to the attendees who have logged into the webinar. Those of you who are familiar with Burrell know that we have been a champion of underserved and under-resourced communities since our inception almost 50 years ago today. We've seen and felt firsthand the impact of systemic racism on Black and brown populations. That's why we develop programs such as Black is Human, Burrell's community engagement platform. Black is Human consists of initiatives such as Allies of Innocence, which provides grief and trauma counseling free of charge to the survivors of gun violence on Chicago's South and West Sides. And it's why, as an agency, we stepped up early on during the COVID pandemic to provide groceries, face masks, and other essential items to families and children in shelters and so much more. We strive to be a resource for the Black community, to provide hope and help as we all navigate through unsettling times. As you listen and participate in today's webinar, I hope that you'll think about how you too can help so that all of us can truly get to a better place. Thank you again for joining us. Ryan?
Faye, thank you so much for that. And I love that you're talking about action. We're going to get into some of the difficult conversations that we're having, but we're going to try to focus a lot on action because that's the key here. So let us now introduce our panelists for today, Burrell executives. Let's start with Tracy Anderson. She's the Vice President and Account Director for Public Relations on the Toyota business. Tracy, I'll just ask you to wave so people see. I know you got your captions. They want to see it, right?
Hello,
Corey
everyone.
C., Vice President, Creative Director on the Toyota business. All right, Brittany Farr, Account Director on the Procter & Gamble's Multicultural Hair Care Portfolio business. Thank you, Brandy. Jeffrey Fortune, Senior Account Planner for the Account Planning and Research Team on the Toyota business. And Brandy Rand, Associate Social Media Director on the Toyota business. So thank you all for being here today. Let's get right into it. Tracy, I'll start with you, and we'll start with the conversations that we're having. You know, this has been an especially tumultuous year for Black Americans, and I know that Burrell has long been a champion for the Black consumer. So I want to know from you, what do you believe is the agency's role and the agency's responsibility in this environment?
Wow, thanks for the question, Ryan. I think the agency's job is to be an ally and a resource to the many brands that we service. you can't imagine the amount of care and concern that a lot of the brands had once everything began to kick off. And that's from the COVID-19 pandemic on into the Black Lives Matters and the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. And so what we did see was an immediate response from many of our clients to get a better understanding of what was going on and to try to determine if and how they should respond and what that response should consist of. Because the most important thing during these times is to be authentic in your response, right? If you're not someone who's, walking around, with your fists in the air, and it doesn't have to be that extreme, but you understand what I'm saying, then it doesn't make sense to put out this strong statement that you stand with us and all of that. We were trying to guide our clients, as you mentioned before, towards more action, using these resources, using your footprint and your reach to activate programs that will impact the under-resourced communities. Use your mic, use your voice to garner these kind of activities from others that you touch. So that's kind of what we were doing and sort of holding our clients' hands throughout both of these pandemics.
And Corey, I want to direct this to you. You talk about the kind of response that companies want to have, and Tracy's mentioning you got to hold your client's hand through that. How is that process? Because you can give people advice, you can feel strongly about that advice, but people don't always want to take it.
True. I think we're dealing with a Black community, though, that is demanding transparency at this time, more so than ever before. I think on a local level, you're seeing Black Americans start to make sure that they're giving their money to Black-owned businesses. On a national level, the brands they do love, the brands that they are loyal to, I think they want to look down in the weeds. They want to see what that PR segment is about. They want to know who's in that boardroom. They want to know what those hiring practices are. So I think that transparency is where we can help them. We can help craft their story and get it out to the consumers.
Brandy, this one's for you. I wonder how being Black impacts your ability to do your job in today's environment.
Ooh, that's a big one. Affect me doing my job. Well, let's just start at just being Black in today's America, right? So as a Black American, I'm 2.3 times more likely to die of coronavirus, and I'm 3 times more likely to die from a police encounter. So that's number one. Secondly, I'm a mom to 2 beautiful Black boys who, call out for me and say, "Mom," similar to the way George did when he was being murdered. I'm also a wife, just celebrated my 7th anniversary with my husband, who's in his 40s, just like George was. And so all of that impacts me in my day-to-day life. It's very heavy. But now let's talk about work. So my role is to lead social media for a major corporation. And so, unfortunately on May 25th, when George was murdered, we were already strapped with providing our clients the most up-to-date sentiment, conversation, and things that are happening in social media from the Black consumer perspective. And so then it's magnified 10 times by the fact that now we have to start listening and understanding how people feel in social about this uprising and this violence. So it's heavy, it's very emotional. And I think that unfortunately we were quarantined, but I think for me and a lot of people in the industry who were at home, it provided a safe haven for us to feel and breathe and take a minute if we needed to, versus being in our agencies and being in the boardrooms. We had a chance to step away. So unfortunately, we are, as Black Americans, dealing with 2 pandemics right now, and it's very heavy.
I find it so interesting that you talk about 2 pandemics. And Jeff, that brings up the point. I think when Brandy talks about being at home, I wonder how that impacted you. Because on the one hand, you want to be with your colleagues. It helps to be in groups, but you can't be. You're processing so much of this. And you're also at the same time trying to work with clients and service them and help their businesses grow.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's really tough. And I would just say, I probably have a unique perspective on this panel, just being a planner. I spend the vast majority of my time talking with consumers. So, research, I'm in their homes. I'm trying to figure out how they connect emotionally to the products and the brands that we promote. And so from my standpoint, it's really tough because I'm used to hearing how emotionally charged, they are in terms of wanting to speak about who they are and how they interact in the world. So that's been really tough for us, because when we go into the clients or we go into a meeting, it's my job to make sure I can communicate exactly how they feel, that I'm able to get across the reality of how they see themselves and how they move in the world. And that's just it's not possible right now, so we're doing research online. We're trying to figure out the best ways to make it work. But I think one been a huge benefit for us has just been the increased effort of trying to have conversations, right? So in the office, it's very easy for us to pop into one another's office to have this conversation on the spot. There's a kind of shared mindset and kind of a grieving that can kind of happen in the office setting. But now we've all gone to our respective houses, our own homes, right? So those conversations have to be a little bit more intentional, and I think that's something that we've tried to bring into our clients as well, right? I'm not seeing you face to face, but obviously we're all involved in what's happening on. It's about being more intentional and having those conversations.
Being intentional. Brittany, I see you nodding your head.
Absolutely. And I think intentionality is so important in this time, in terms of like as Brandy said, it's just really heavy. And I think for me, being aware, and I'm going to transition a little bit of when you do speak up and you do speak out, and the potential for backlash and the consequences that can come from that, it's why the intentionality in your connections are so important. And I'm fortunate where I work for the HBCU of advertising, as I like to affectionately call it. So I have colleagues that look like me. I have leadership that looks like me. And so I am able to have these conversations and be more intentional in establishing these connections in places that are safe for me to do so. But I recognize that the majority of my colleagues and peers are not able to do that. And in fact, I talk often about a few of my peers started an initiative, Race is a Man, that they launched around Juneteenth. And they did it with the express purpose of giving, people of color opportunities to really, speak about what's going on in their world, speak about their run-ins and influences, or experiences rather, with these times. And there were so many more accounts off the record that were on the record during that time and in this climate. So again, intentionality is important. And I think being able to have those safe spaces to engage in this type of dialogue is definitely important.
But there's intentionality, and then there's authenticity, this ability to really speak in your true voice. Do you feel, or do you get concerned? You talked about ramifications. Do you fear that there might be negative ramifications of using your authentic voice in speaking about this outside of Burrell?
Absolutely. I would be remiss in saying it if I didn't think or believe that in 2020, people of color, particularly Black talent, have a real fear of backlash and against speaking out. And as I mentioned, even with the campaign, some of the campaign and work that I've seen, folks are really grappling with, I want to speak out, I have something to say, but I understand the consequences and the backlash. And I think that we have to really ask ourselves, why that is. What are we doing in culture? What type of work climates are we cultivating that would make someone feel as if I speak up, there are ramifications that will come from it? And then the question becomes, what are we going to do about it? So for me personally, I've wrestled with this a lot in my own life. And what I've decided and have gone on record to say with clients and otherwise is that I'll no longer stand by and be complicit. And so, I've been challenging, my colleagues and peers to say, hey, when you see the blatant missteps, when you are seeing the continuation of the inequities, when you know that your clients or the company's external message doesn't match the internal reality, be compelled to speak up. And we kind of got to get over the respectability politics in a way. It really is the only way that this narrative changes. That's with more people speaking out, having more safe spaces to be able to do so in a transparent way without fear of backlash. Zero tolerance for racism or injustice, whether it be in the workplace or otherwise. And then no more shrugging off of these experiences when they are raised and brought to your attention.
Corey,
Ryan,
go
I
ahead.
just want to add, like, this is the exact kind of good trouble John Lewis was talking about, right? Okay, we have to use our voices. So, I'm a Black man and a proud Black man before I'm an employee in advertising. So if speaking out about Black Lives Matter, about arrested cops that murdered Breonna Taylor, or even participating in a peaceful protest puts my job in jeopardy, or maybe a future job down the line in jeopardy, then so be it, because I want to work at places, organizations whose values align with mine. I think the days of working for people and biting your tongue and swallowing blood as you go home, I think those days are over.
Yeah, I agree, and at the same time, I want you guys to express to people, and Jeff, maybe I'll put this to you, or Brand. Jeff, I'll start with you, and then maybe Brandy. One thing I'm seeing in this conversation is all of you are saying, I'm not going to bite my tongue anymore. I'm going to say what I feel. I just wonder, are there, and let me put this diplomatically if I can, are there ways in which you are still feeling, Jeff, like there are things I think that can make things better, especially for Black Americans, especially in my industry, especially with the consumers I'm talking to and in conveying their opinions, that I struggle to share, or if I don't, how can I help other people that struggle to share?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a personal one, I think. I think a big part of it, first and foremost, I would just start with just being unashamed, right, with your point of view, because I think that's a big challenge that I think we have stepping outside of our agency, stepping into the client's office, is how much do I need to temper down my rage or my passion or my emotionalism. And I think a big part of this is I think we're just at a point now where I'm hearing from consumers, we're hearing from colleagues, we're just hearing from the community that, I mean, people are fed up, and that's just the reality of where I think a lot of people feel. And I think the conversations are good. I think it's great to have these courageous conversations, but if you can't express the full extent of how you're feeling or your perspective, I think you're doing a disservice, right, in terms of coming to some sort of solution. Because I think that notion of, like Corey was saying, biting your tongue or, just pacifying it so there's some sort of harmony or peace, I think it's a disservice. So, yes, it's a kind of fine line, because not everyone's going to understand the same level of hurt that you come to the situation with or that you're feeling, right? And so I think the onus is on us to educate people if that's what it needs to happen. But if someone is saying, I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to hear what you're saying, I want to grieve with those who are grieving, I want to understand where you're coming from, I think we should be able to, fully lay that out, right? Wherever we are on that spectrum of outrage to, logical thinking, trying to figure out what the next solution is. I think you just got to have that point of view and be true to it, right, in those conversations.
Yeah, there's a term called disenfranchised grief. I'm not sure if a bunch of people are familiar about it, but ultimately it's grief that's not socially recognized by society, not generally recognized by society, I should say. So it translates to, like, so when an entertainer dies that you didn't really know, but you grieve them, or when a colleague dies and people are like, why are you so grief stricken? I think a lot of Black Americans are dealing with disenfranchised grief from the constant news cycle of people who look like us, who could be our nephews, brothers, cousins, and sisters, Sandra Bland, that we just grieve for. because we know that we have to have certain conversations with our children, certain conversations with our nieces and nephews and husbands and wives to make sure that they make it back home. So to Jeff's point, yes, it's very personal, how we grieve and how we, you know, fight and how we protest. Some people are protesting by just educating themselves with shows that the next Netflix stream put up for understanding the Black plight, and that some people are actually out marching. So I think it's very, very personal, but it's important that we be able to execute it.
And Tracy, just to sort of talk about the impact on Burrell of the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, what was the impact on the agency?
I mean, you know, as my colleagues have already expressed, it's been a little different because we're kind of dealing with this experience in these pods, right? We're all Zooming and Microsoft Teaming and carrying on, and that's how we're coming together to talk about these things. Where if I'm in the office and someone just, you know, stops by my office and just kicks back and says, "Man, how do you feel today?" And I really miss those times because we do that with each other, and that's one of the blessings of being, you know, in our environment, because as Corey mentioned, we're all experiencing it in some way. And so what you internalize and where and how you can express it is different for everybody. You know, you could be a frontline worker and be really just upset and torn apart about this, but you've got to be out there and still servicing people with a smile on your face that no one can see behind your mask, but still, you know, you still have to wear it, you know what I'm saying? And so we have the luxury of having a job where we can work from home, we can call each other up, and we can experience it. And I think as a communications person in particular, my job is to develop messaging and spin and all of these good things. And so when you're now interfacing with clients who the blessing and the curse of this whole thing is, they begin to think like, hey, she is a Black woman. How does this feel to her? They know that I'm a mom. I've got a 17-year-old, well, soon to be 17-year-old twins, right? So as I look at how their world is evolving and what they're experiencing at this time and being able to express it to them, and seeing that as we, you know, as advertising targets begin to become younger, these kids aren't going to go for it. We're going to have to be transparent. You know, they see exactly what's going on and they're not afraid to hold their tongues. And so there's got to be a delicate balance for these brands to begin to think about, you know, these kids, they're seeing everything, they're experiencing everything through social media, they're TikToking, they're carrying on, and they're using their voice at an age much earlier than I'm sure, you know, many of us have, you know. And when a client is saying, you know, how do you feel? And it's tough. I've got a daughter who's very much into social justice and activism. I've had to pull her back from many a march because I'm like, hey kid, maybe the local march, maybe the school march, but you're not going downtown because it's just not necessarily safe. I worry about her being down there. If I don't feel safe to accompany her, then I certainly don't want her going there alone, right? And then I have a son who, we live in this suburb that we're in because it's diverse, because he can ride his bike at night, he can go to the 7-Eleven and not worry about getting shot at. But now I have to say to him, I need you in here at 9 o'clock. I need you here at dark. And he's like, dark? Man, I'm almost 17, Mom. I can't come home at 10. No, you can't. You know, why? Because he cannot walk these streets right now after dark. I am afraid. I'm scared that someone may grab him, snatch him because he looks like the kid who just tried to shoot at the person over here. And so all of those emotions manifest themselves within these conversations that we're having with clients. And what I have appreciated is clients and former colleagues who actually asked, how do you feel? Who in this moment realize, because they get so used to talking to you and working with you, not saying that color doesn't matter to them, but you're kind of like, they're doing their jobs. And so this kind of made people take a step back and say, I wonder how she feels about this. And I've really appreciated that.
It's a powerful sentiment, because not only asking how you feel, but actually then staying and listening as opposed to offering how they feel is powerful. And it makes me think, and Brittany, I want to ask you about this. I want to talk about action now. When you talk about what you're going through and the emotions that we are all feeling around this. At the same time, you mentioned, Tracy, colleagues are asking how you feel, but we also know that we have white colleagues who come and they ask us how to navigate social justice issues. And it's in nothing but a positive way. It's how can I be an ally? What should I say? What should I do? How can I handle this? At least for me, that invites complicated emotions because I'm dealing with my own stuff and trying to answer that question. Brittany, I'll start with you. How are you dealing with those types of requests from people who aren't Black while also trying to manage your emotions and not to mention your workload?
So my response will probably err on the side of unpopular opinion. But the truth is my initial response is, and I love this question, was to ask for space. And that space was necessary for me. And it's exactly what you said. What I recognized very quickly was that I did not possess the mental or emotional capacity to try to manage through and unpack my own emotions, with the workload in the middle of a pandemic, with then trying to turn and help, perhaps provide solution or have dialogue with colleagues that wanted to know what I could do, and I do believe most of the questions that were genuine. But I can honestly say, up until that point, I had never had a white colleague engage me in a discussion about race relations. In fact, I've probably been called racist or overly concerned or overly sensitive about race issues by more of my white peers than I care to admit. So I really struggled with the question of, I haven't felt heard, not valued, not protected. This isn't the first time. So where were you? Where was this energy a year ago, 10 years ago? And it was kind of my initial stance was probably an angry one. And it was one of, I'm telling you, and my people are telling you I can't breathe because your knee is on our neck. And you are responding to me, asking me to do your homework. And I know that sounds harsh, but that was just the reality of what I was grappling with. And during a global pandemic, as I mentioned. So, we're talking about a month and a half, later, and where am I at with that question? And it's the same. It's hard for me. These are issues that are not new, in my opinion, and I can be on an island here, but Black people are not necessarily responsible, at least solely, for solving this problem. It's a problem that we didn't create. So in quoting a dear colleague of mine, what I say to my friends and what I have said to those that I've spoken to, is if you really truly want to be an ally, and I believe that you're genuine in your questioning, what you can't do to me is to pull up with a blank notebook or a blank canvas, asking me to provide kind of the cliff notes to how to engage. But what I would ask you to do first is to start with that dialogue internally. Ask yourself, what can you do? Ask yourself, what if positive or negative might have contributed to the climate? Ask your peers the same, and then come back to the table with solutions that we can work through and talk through together. So again, may not be the popular response, but that's my truth in terms of how I've been coping with those asks.
I just want to remind people we're having such a great conversation. I'm seeing a lot of questions come in, but they're coming in the chat room. If you have questions, send them to the Q&A box so that we can make sure we get them and we can answer some of those questions. So I just want to remind you, not the chat box, but the Q&A box. But, Brittany, I think you might think it's unpopular. I think a lot of people out there are hearing that and saying it's an interesting perspective. Maybe I agree with that. And then I think about your business. Brandy, let me ask you, the concept of total market agencies, I'll admit, as a person who's not in the advertising business, was unfamiliar to me until recently. But representation of people of color in that business is very low. And that's not unlike the media business that I work in. But how can agencies, or how should agencies, harness the power of Black team members in these agencies to really not only get, how can I say this, to really bring out the best in us? And a lot of times when I ask this question, I'm like, not just for us, but for the company.
Yeah, so I know I love the HBCU of advertising. That's dope. So Brittany spoke about that. And so, but I've had stints. This is my first multicultural agency to work at, but I've had stints at General Market. I've been either one of one or one of 13 of 700 of the brightest creative minds in advertising as a Black person. And so in that space, it was often hard to bring my true authentic self to work because that space just wasn't created. There were not enough people, especially in the position of senior leadership, that I could go to. We talk about all the time in any industry, finding a mentor, finding a sponsor, finding someone that you can bounce things off of, especially your personal experience at work. And there just wasn't that. So I know for a fact that those who are in general market agencies who are Black or of color, right, because the numbers are low across the board, are struggling with that. And so while I think agencies attempt to do a good job of having the culture committees, right? We have the culture committees where we want to make sure everybody's good and jovial and having fun. And typically, I mean, they're fun, they serve a purpose, but ultimately they shake out to be a time to eat and drink and commune. And sometimes we talk about what campaign we're going to do as an agency for Black History Month or for Cinco de Mayo, but that's surface level and it's a form of virtue signaling. I think the people that are in positions of power should do a number of things. So the first thing to amplify the voices is give them a seat at the table. So it's one thing to check a box from an EOC perspective to say, yes, we have this number of Black people, this many Asians, this many Latinos, but it's bigger than that. And then really, besides checking who's at the table, make sure that they are in the rooms that make a difference, right? So it's one thing to be in the door, maybe at an internship level or a lower level, but if that person can't speak up and affect change in what's happening with the messages that we're putting out, that's why we have the issues with the turtleneck blackface sweaters. And that's why we have the people taking off sweaters and getting lighter. And that's why we have all the things. So amplify the voices of those who are in the room at general market agencies already. Do more at the culture committees than just, eating and drinking. Like really bring in somebody to talk about cultural bias, right? A lot of people aren't familiar with really what that looks like. There's varying degrees and levels of cultural bias. And I think that that's something super important to do. And I think that we need to value less bringing somebody into a good culture and respect more their culture. And so what I mean by that is we so often want to make people assimilate into the culture that's at the agency instead of integrating them. And so everything I just spoke about are ways that we can just change the paradigm shift to really how we respect and amplify the people that are in the space and do a better job of bringing more people in the space so that it really is diverse.
So that's within the agency world. And as you were talking and giving those examples of things that end up being blatantly offensive and how things like that happen, Jeff, it made me think of you because you deal with consumers directly. I wonder what you think in this moment, because we're talking about action, what should change to reflect Black consumers and avoid producing that kind of work that's either, like on the one hand, just insensitive or just offensive, blatantly?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it, and I'm just going to be biased here again as being a planner. I mean, we speak to African-American consumers all the time. We've got to cherish those voices, right? I mean, it's more than just checking the box on saying that we did the research. We kind of heard what they said. I mean, we got to really understand what they're asking for and what they're demanding. I mean, this kind of goes back to what Corey was talking about. I think consumers are at the point now where they're beyond the notion of saying, hey, we wish we were represented in some of these things. We wish we had a better representation of who we are. I think they're holding brands accountable. They're saying either we will see this or it's going to hurt your pocketbook, right? So, when we think about it coming from agencies, marketing companies, communication companies, right? When we go in there and we clients, I mean, that's got to be this tenor and the same voice that we bring forth is that these things are being demanded at this point, right? It's no longer just let's put an African-American face in there, right? But when you talk about like things that are just openly offensive, right? I think this goes back to a little bit to what Brandy was talking about. I mean, you got to have people in the room who are willing to speak up on behalf of the community, right? And that goes beyond just saying that you have an African-American face in the room, right? I think you've got to identify people who are saying, I'm passionate understand this community on a deeper level, and I'm willing to stand up or stand in the gap for what they're asking for, right? So it's less about just checking the box of having the right people in the right places. It's really about trying to identify who's really passionate about these communities, right? And acting as a guardian or a protector for them. Because I'll cut, just quickly, I'll cut some brands some slack a little bit, right? Because I think what you'll see in a lot of the boardrooms or a lot of the decision making parties is people who just don't know, right? And what they're looking for is, well, where's the expert, right? Who's the person that I can turn to say, lead us in the right direction? And if that person isn't willing to speak up on behalf of what's really happening in the community, you're going to have a failure, right? You're going to have a mishap. You're going to have something that slips through the cracks that's offensive or that doesn't speak authentically to the community. That very well can happen. And I think, from our end, we're constantly challenging ourselves, right? Within the group of the panel that you guys see here, but also within our agency, right? To have those conversations and to battle it out even internally before we take things to the client. So just thinking about it on the client side, that's got to be amplified, twofold.
All right, so Corey, let's talk about that. I mean, considering the current climate that we're in, what changes do you see coming in how you market to Black consumers going forward?
I think for a long time, Black consumers have seen a product they like and they rushed out and spent their money on it. And I just don't think that day is still here. I think now, like I talked about a little bit earlier, they're digging in the weeds. They want to know, does this brand share and even respect my personal values? And if they do, show me, where is it? So I think people are looking for receipts. I think there was a time when something bad would happen and a big company would write a check and Black America would just go away, right? There was a time when a well-crafted apology or PR statement would make people go away, right? I just don't think that's where we are in 2020 after all that's happened this year. I think they want to see more. And I think brands are going to have to be vocal about what they're doing. I think they're going to have to be honest about what they haven't done in the past. Like I like seeing brands step up and say we've been wrong, before, but now we're going to try to fix it. That kind of honesty and transparency, I think, helps the relationship and builds a little bit more trust, because I don't think that trust is there. I think that, this idea of them versus us, I think that's brands don't want to get put in that bucket,
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because it lets me segue to something I want to ask Tracy, and it's about the statements. So you mentioned this idea of companies being vocal, even admitting that you're wrong. But here's the thing. We live in a time where people are looking so carefully at language, and we've seen so many companies say, Black Lives Matter, and we stand against racism. And there's a lot of people out there that are saying, that's great, that's the popular thing to say right now. It doesn't mean anything to me. Then we've seen companies struggle with putting a lot of information about what they are doing, and it seems like they're trying too hard. It's a difficult I'd say it's a difficult needle to thread, Tracy. So I guess, what actions would you say companies can take to not only help employees stay engaged and empowered, but also to help others outwardly know that they want to either be better, or they are doing better, or here's what they are doing?
Well, you want to get the word out on the things that you've been doing all along. Right now, people don't know what they don't know. And so if you're a brand that has always given back to the community, has always had a voice in the community, has programs that support and uplift the underserved, gives away scholarships, don't just be in this crush now to tell everybody about it. You have to be consistent in that message. It needs to be happening, all along, because there's no statement that anyone in this world can craft that's going to satisfy everybody. You can do a statement, and Brandy's on the other side with social, having to vet the responses to said statement. I'm over here and people are, we put something out in a press release and we're getting responses that way. And so it's just tough. So I want to say that about having to craft these statements. It's just a delicate balance. But what we keep encouraging the clients to do is to get out there, get in the community and see how you can impact and affect change. These COVID-19 hasn't gone away. People are still suffering. People are still short on PPE. As Faye alluded to earlier, we have an engagement program through Black is Human, where we were actually getting out there and having groceries delivered to a shelter that houses displaced families, and getting them the goods that they needed and getting them gloves and masks. I mean, those kind of things are still needed. It's still happening. You still can't get Clorox wipes when you go to Walmart, So right now, there's the simplest of things that can help, impact and affect change. And then, of course, there's, again, using your scale, using those dollars to donate to the HBCUs that are probably struggling, donate to a lot of these Black entrepreneurs who maybe didn't have the funding to get past these 2-3 months, develop a program that helps support them in that way. I mean, there are just so many levels that this thing is impacted, from the front line to the, professionals, and in between, the athletes, all of that. So being able to galvanize your resources, aligning with, someone like Burrell, who takes so much time and care, and the work that Jeff Fortune and his colleagues do that are talking to the consumers and bringing back those insights, because we're going to be able to shed more perspective and more light on where you need to be. What do people really need? How do you help? And that's what we did see, a number of brands coming and saying to us, like, I know we got this statement. I'll say I didn't even like the statement that my company made, but I'm here on the front lines and on the marketing team, so to speak. And I want to know if we can take our dollars for this program that's not happening because we all can't come together, and determine some other ways to help people. And then at least you're doing something authentic, and then you can message it out, and it doesn't feel like, look at me, I'm helping. I'm the good Samaritan. It's real, and it makes sense.
Mm. Okay, I'm glad to see brands are doing that and coming out and saying, I want to do more, even if I can't do what I was typically going to do because of the pandemic. So guys, we have about 3 minutes left, and I wanted to just put this question out there, and then we'll go to our Q&A session. And I want you guys to jump in. Jeff, I'll direct it to you, but whoever wants to jump in with the minutes we have left, that would be great. So I think the biggest concern that a lot of Black folks I know have is that this moment is going to end. I work in the media, and I have seen time and again something incredible galvanizes a portion of the country or galvanizes us as Black people, and 3 months later, we're on to the next thing. And people have short memories, and the movement doesn't have the energy behind it that we wish it would continue to have. So, Jeff, I'll start with you. You're working at Burrell, an agency that knows how to not only work with the Black community, but also knows how to keep momentum going. So how do you think that Black people can sustain this change, this moment, and avoid fatigue or avoid others co-opting the moment and sort of diluting the message that Black and brown people out there have?
Yeah, it's I mean, this is a huge, I think we're all dealing with. I would just say from the internal standpoint, for us, a big part of it just has to do with the idea and the notion of just understanding that right now people are processing, right? Like they're processing what's happening and what's going on. So yes, there is a groundswell of information and people wanting to share and get involved, but human nature is that they are going to get fatigued. I mean, you just have to understand that. I think in terms of continuing the conversation, though, this kind of goes back to a couple of questions that were asked a little bit earlier. You think about, big communication companies like Burrell. I think one of the biggest things that's kind of illuminated for us is that when these instances happen, right, it puts the weight back on us, or it reminds us of the responsibility that we have in this agency to talk to these things, right, beyond just the moment. Right. Yes, we got to service our clients. We've got to do our work. We're overworked. We're overstretched, just like everybody else at other agencies. But we have resources. We have access to media partnerships and social media partnerships. We've got intel from, creative coalitions that we can tap into. Those should be things that we automatically should be putting together and putting out in the world. And I think as we continue to move forward, it's got to be that type of level of effort, right? It can't be led from, the nation saying, hey, this is a big issue, we want to talk about it, because they're going to forget about it, right? We've got to continue to say, hey, whatever assets that we have in this agency can pull together, we need to put that perspective out in the world so the conversation continues to go on. I think one of the ways that we can also do that is, just think internally, right? In terms of your organization as a whole, right? I think town halls are great, right? Like there's viewing this and we'll see this and we can share that out, but eventually it's going to be individual conversations that need to happen, right? It's going to need to be the people sitting across from your desk. It's going to need to be the marketing team talking to the advertising team, right? I think you just take it from the big grand scale and you make it small, right? You talk about how did 2 or 3 people get together and have some sort of understanding, right? I think you encourage people to educate others, right? We do this thing it's where we take them out and we try to help them understand the African-American reality, our community, how we live. I think you need to do that as well. It's something that we've kind of neglected, but if people are saying, hey, I want to understand, connection, right? Where you can have ongoing conversations, maybe not the whole department, maybe not the whole agency, maybe not the whole corporation, but 2 or 3 people where you can continue to have these kind of personal conversations where you can learn from each other and continue on with the message. It's going to be individual triads and dyads, I think, that need to have these conversations moving forward.
All right. Now, I know I said I wanted other people to jump in, but we're getting so many good questions. I want to make sure I get right to them. So here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to ask the questions as they've come in. And guys, I want you to just, if you want to answer, just jump right in. And I know you guys are a team, so everybody else will let that person answer. So I'll start with Lewis Williams, who asks, why do you think the advertising media has not been interested in the mood of multicultural agencies?
I can jump.
Go ahead.
Okay, I can jump into that. I think, I've asked this question quite directly to several clients, past and future. And I think there are a lot of myths that need to be busted about what multicultural agencies are and aren't. So I've heard things, around they aren't capable. They aren't as polished. They're too rough around the edges, or my favorite is too expensive, to lead the work, and particularly that work that reflects the issues that impacts this segment the most. I remember, just having these conversations and what that sounds like. So I think there's just a lot of myths around that. And to be truthful, I joke with people all the time, and I want clients to understand multicultural is not sexy. We choose it because we love it. We don't typically get the budgets. We don't typically get the visibility. We don't get the recognition, or even sometimes the respect that our counterparts receive. But what I can absolutely say is that the people that are here that work in multicultural, they do it because they're passionate about the segment. They believe in a more equitable future, and they want to do the work to help to steer us there. And so for me, that's been a lot of the conversation around some of the reluctance around MC agencies. And I just think we need to start busting those myths.
All right, let's go to Cam Johnson. He asks, what does improvement look like? Who wants to take it?
Well, I'll jump in
I
there.
do that. I'll jump in a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, hire more Black people. How about that? Let's start there. Okay. Advertising is about communicating, and when you're trying to communicate to millions of people, especially millions of people, when you don't know their cultural sensitivities, you need to hire the experts that do. And we have an industry full of talented Black people. Hire them, put them in the room, let them help you navigate around those cultural pitfalls and landmines. I think even just create something as simple as a TV commercial. It's not one decision, it's hundreds of decisions in that process. And one bad decision in there could turn a commercial that is harmless into something that offends millions of people. And now you end up with a consumer mad at a brand, you end up with a brand mad at an ad agency, and you end up with an ad agency that can only be mad at itself because it didn't what? Hire more Black people.
Yeah, but from an advertising agency perspective, so there's 2 things. So from an ad agency perspective, I think that you know, everybody released their numbers. There was a big initiative to show what your employee database looks like as far as ethnicity. And so we saw all these releases of, we have this percent and this percent. None of them, however, matched what's going on in the United States from a percentage perspective. But I think if you're going to release and say how many people you have, then we need to make actionable change to change the number. So it's one thing to say, hey, this is what we have. We know we have an issue. We're going to work on it. But in advertising, and I think in a lot of different industries, we talk about SMART goals, right? So we need to be able to measure them. So we need for the call to action, I think in the next evolution of that would be to, yes, that's great. Thanks for sharing your numbers. But now what are you going to do to change that? The other thing that I just have to say is after the whole call to action for more Black people to be involved in every facet of corporate America, on LinkedIn, there were so many job openings for DEI representatives. Like, I mean, I was scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and I have a few that are in those positions, but then there was like, oh, this company hired this DEI person. Well, that's great. But my next call to action would be, now that you've hired them, empower them. Give them the opportunity, give them the resources, give them the team to make change in your organization. Because there's a lot of DEI people that are in a position, in a role, but their hands are tied because it's checking a box. And I think that it's critical to make sure that we understand that no more can it be just that we need to have a person in a role, but they truly, truly need to be empowered. They just have to.
All right, we've got about 4 minutes left. Let's try to get as many questions as we can. Gail Bean, hope I'm saying that right, asks, how can you engage in making the political platform of our Black Party stronger? I think she's saying here, how can we make Black folks' political platform stronger right now? Anybody want to take it?
Political.
All right, we'll get back to you, Gail. I promise. We'll try to, maybe somebody can work that into our next answer. I want to get to another question from Cynthia Harris. She says, we're now in a place where many people are acknowledging there is a problem, but how can we drive for empathy with clients and organizations to admit that there is a problem within their respective organization? And by the way, she says it's a great discussion. Who wants to take that? Yes, there is a problem. But how do I tell you that there's a problem within your organization, client?
So the call to action again, so I mentioned the ad agencies releasing their information, but a lot of brands are doing it too. So Black people are calling for receipts right now, and that's just what it is. So they're asking, hey, let me see what your makeup of your employee sector looks like. Let me see what the makeup of your board of directors looks like. Let me see who's at the C-suite. And so a lot of brands have done that and released that information. But again, what's the actionable change to change the number? Put a date on it. So we know we put dates on when campaigns launch, put a date on when you are going to increase the numbers and then how you're gonna do it. I think that's how we drive for them to just be accountable. I think just the problem with racism is the lack of accountability across the board. So I think if people were more accountable and don't just do the first step, but do all the steps to create the change.
Sounds like you're talking, come with facts. If I can come with facts and
Yes.
show you what's happening factually, then that can help you understand things that you can correct or make better to make your organization better. It's an interesting point. This is an interesting one. What is the impact on the Black consumer behaviors when advertising represents and respects the values and experiences of the Black community? I think it's an interesting, you guys have touched on this, but let's have somebody take that just to show what the actual impact is.
You can build, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. No, sorry, Corey. I was just say it's huge. It's huge. I mean, we see it. I probably can't divulge too much of our tracking and all that information, but when we see consumers respond to our advertisements or respond to a way that we've depicted African American consumers, you see it not only in the purchasing intent for them, but also the way that they view the brand, like measurable. So like for us, that's always a case study for us, right? When we're able to fully kind of go into a lane that we know that we've heard from consumers in terms of the way they want to be seen or depicted, to use Brandy's term, we have receipts for that. But I think furthermore, just from the community standpoint, the effect that I think it has just from the community's feeling around how they're depicted, we see raised in the next rounds of research, because they'll call out specific brands who are doing it well and why it emotionally connected to them. And a lot of times what we see is a lot of hope, right, tied to that in terms of what's going to happen in the future. So, you know, for brands, for ad execs, this absolutely should be the grail for them, right? Is not only how do I put a message out there that's authentic, but how do I put one that's truly going to connect with them? Because you see it not only on the bottom line, but you also see it in the way that they think about your brand.
All right, guys, we have time for one more, and we might need to make it quick because we're running out of time. But I want to ask, for anybody who wants to take this, Allison Lake asks, how do you overcome the fear of potentially losing a client for sharing your opinions? We talked about it in the Q&A, but it's a good way to sort of guide people on what do you do if you want to share your opinion? How do you handle that and overcome that fear?
I think it comes down to data, right? So if you can't argue data, so to what Jeff does from a planning perspective and the focus groups and the research from consumers, from what I do from social listening to seeing how behavioral analysis is, trends that come up, words and behaviors that are used, we just have to show them the data. And like, this is what it is. This is how people currently feel about your brand. And then help them solve it. So it's one thing just to present it, but then also come with a solution on how to turn the corner and make it better. But, you know, data was a big thing. It peaked a couple years ago and it's still very important. So you can't really argue with it. So I think that is the most easy lane to enter into having that conversation about the change that needs to be made, is just really to present the data because it's there.
All right.
I'll jump in and say, if I can, I jokingly say we got about a 90-day to 6-month window to probably get everything off of our chest that we've been wanting to say in this climate. So I tell people, use it to your advantage. I've had a lot of discussions. There are companies that don't have a single multicultural agency on their roster. So as Brandy said, that's the data and those are the facts. And for those that do, either the opportunities or the resourcing is far from equitable. Those are the facts. You know, again, when we talk about equitable resourcing, you know, I often tell clients, you know, scarcity mindset should not be the posture from which multicultural agencies are forced to fuel great work. Those are things that you can say because those are the facts. So I just say use this window of time. Folks and companies and colleagues and your peers, they are asking, and I do believe genuinely want to be engaged in what role can I play. So use the time, use the climate to your advantage.
All right, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists, great questions as well. And to close this out, you know, we talked about the incredible work that Faye and McGee Williams Ossie have done. I want to welcome in McGee Williams Ossie to sort of close us out and give us some final thoughts. McGee, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you to all of the wonderful panelists, and thank you to everyone that tuned in this afternoon for this very important conversation. Thanks for all the insights, and thanks for being a part of it. During my 30 years at Burrell, we've had the pleasure of developing targeted marketing strategies with really resonant narratives that further the business objectives of some of the world's most beloved brands. But what we are most passionate about is leading initiatives that help stem the tide of racial injustice by leveling the playing field for African Americans through policy and through at the local and national level. Someone asked the question a little bit ago about, you know, politics and political. 5 years ago, we jumped into that arena. And we're doing just that now with our political practice, and it continues to grow. And it helps us, if you will, gives us the ability to change what we want to see happen in our community. So again, we thank you all for joining us today. We hope that this discussion has inspired you to use your voice, to use your power, and to continue to support young leaders, young talent, Black-owned businesses, and rising entrepreneurs to help make our communities better and stronger. Thanks again. Have a good afternoon.